There's a feeling you might know well, even if you've never been able to put it into words. It's that strange tiredness that appears at the end of the day, when you haven't done that much, but still feel like you've carried the world on your shoulders. It's not physical tiredness. It's not exactly mental tiredness. It's something deeper than that. It's the feeling of having spent the whole day adjusting, changing your tone, changing your language, even changing your way of thinking depending on who's in front of you. You speak one way with your parents, another way with your children, or with younger people at work, yet another way with colleagues your own age. And at some point, without realizing it, you started to feel that none of these versions is completely you. They are all you, and none of them are, at the same time. You understand a world that is disappearing, and you also understand a world that is still being built. But there's something uncomfortable about understanding both, and not fully belonging to either. It's like being fluent in two languages, but not having a country of origin. You can talk to anyone, but rarely can anyone truly connect with you. And perhaps you've never thought about it this way, but there's a psychological explanation for that silent fatigue you feel, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Before we continue, if you identified with this opening, consider subscribing to the channel. Here we talk about those deeper layers of human behavior that almost no one articulates out loud. Things you feel, but have never been able to name. The central idea I want to present to you is simple, but it can reorganize a lot within you when it makes sense for the first time. You are a translator, not in the literal sense of the word, but in its deeper psychological sense. You spend a good part of your life translating one world into another, translating people into people, translating eras into eras, translating ways of thinking that have learned to exist at completely different paces. You grew up in a world that functioned in a certain way, slow, physical, with waiting time between one thing and another. You learned to read silence, to read body language, to read between the lines, because that's how you understood each other. And then, at some point in your adolescence or early adulthood, that world was simply rewritten. Everything became faster, more immediate, more visible, more connected. And you had to learn the new language without ever forgetting the old one. And that puts you in a very specific position. You understand both sides. You understand why your father can't use his cell phone. And you understand why a 20-year-old can't go 5 minutes without it. You understand both pains. But precisely because you understand both, you don't completely belong to either group. And this, over time, creates a very particular form of loneliness. A loneliness that comes not from a lack of connection, but from an excess of understanding. You overthink, you over-anticipate, you over-plan. Before sending a message, you revise it 3 times. Before a conversation, you mentally rehearse what you're going to say. Before a meeting, you imagine 5 possible scenarios. And this isn't necessarily anxiety in the clinical sense. It's a direct consequence of having learned, from an early age, that context changes everything. That depending on who's in front of you, the same phrase can mean completely different things. So your mind has learned to calculate contexts all the time. And it never rests, because there's always a new context to decipher. The second thing is a persistent feeling of not being fully understood. No matter how much you explain yourself, there's always a part left out. Older people don't fully understand what you're going through because their world had more stable rules. Younger people don't fully understand because they never knew the analog version of existence. And you're stuck in the middle, making a huge effort to translate yourself, and rarely feeling that the translation has come through completely. The third thing is an independence that borders on exaggeration. You've become accustomed to solving things on your own. You learned how to use a computer on your own. You learned how to use the internet on your own. You learned how to use social media on your own. You learned to navigate worlds without a manual, without anyone explaining things to you. And this self-sufficiency, which seems like a strength, also has a hidden side. You have difficulty asking for help, not because you're proud, but because, deep down, you believe that no one will understand exactly what you need, so it's easier to solve things on your own than to try to explain. And the fourth thing, perhaps the most exhausting of all, is the burnout of having multiple versions of yourself. You have a version for work, a version for your parents, a version for your children, if you have any, a version for social media, a version for old friends, and they are all real, but switching between them all day long consumes an energy that no one sees. It's a silent psychic energy, and it accumulates. And in the same week, you're the person trying to explain to a 22-year-old why it's not okay to respond to a serious message with a laughing emoji. You translate technology on one hand, and you translate human behavior on the other. And you do it without complaining, because it's become second nature. Do you remember what it was like to wait for the movie to air on TV at the scheduled time? Do you remember the sound of the dial-up modem, the smell of VHS tapes, the feeling of arriving home and the landline ringing and you not knowing who it was? And at the same time, you live in a world where everything is instantaneous, where waiting has become a flaw, where silence has become discomfort, and a part of you misses a slowness that today's world considers almost pathological. You switch modes depending on who you're with. When you're with people your own age, you understand each other with half words, using old references that nobody else understands anymore. When you're with older people, you moderate your vocabulary, avoid certain topics, and speak more slowly. When you're with younger people, you update your vocabulary, pay attention to slang, and make sure not to seem dated. And this constant switching of modes is so automatic that you don't even realize you're doing it anymore. But your brain notices, and it takes its toll at the end of the day. And if this video is making sense to you, leave a like. It really helps the channel reach more people who need to hear this. People who grew up in a single system with stable rules rarely need to develop this intensely. But you did, because the ground beneath your feet shifted along the way. This flexibility is a real valuable skill that gives you advantages that many people don't have. You adapt quickly. You read context easily. You can converse with very different profiles. In many ways, you are someone who naturally builds bridges. But there's a silent cost to this. Every time you switch modes, your brain expends energy. Every time you translate, you burn cognitive resources that don't immediately return. And this flexibility that seems graceful on the outside is, internally, a constant tension. It's as if a part of your mind is always on high alert, paying attention to which version of you needs to emerge now. And this continuous attention is what exhausts you at the end of the day. Even when you think you haven't accomplished anything, your brain did exactly what it had to do to survive in a world that was rewriting itself as you grew up within it. If you had been born 20 years earlier or 20 years later, you wouldn't have developed this mental structure in the same way. But you were born on the border, and those born on the border learn to speak two languages. They learn to live in two times. They learn to inhabit a version of the world that no one else inhabits in exactly the same way. And that's no small thing. That's a specific form of emotional intelligence, built out of necessity. Most people can only see the world from one point of view. You can see it from two. And that dual vision makes you someone with a depth that many people don't have, but also someone who carries a weight that many people don't know. So there's a beautiful side to all of this, and there's a heavy side, and both need to be said. The beautiful thing is that being a translator gives you access to things that other people simply don't see. You perceive nuances. You notice when someone is using words from one era to describe a pain from another era. You notice when two groups are saying the same thing in different languages and don't even realize it. You are often the silent point of connection between people who would never understand each other without you. And even when no one notices this work, it happens. You are the invisible stitching. But the downside is that being a translator all the time is a lonely position, because the translator is rarely translated. You spend your life helping others understand each other, and rarely does someone do that work for you. And this asymmetry over the years leaves a mark that is difficult to explain to those who don't experience it, which is exactly why you're watching this video now, because someone finally put into words something you felt for a long time, but never had a name for. Perhaps what hurts most is realizing, after many years, that you've spent so much time translating others that you've forgotten to learn your own language, the one that doesn't need adjusting for anyone, the one in which you are simply you, without versions, without manners, without translation. And perhaps the most important work of your life from now on will not be to continue translating the world. It will be to learn, slowly, to listen to what you yourself are saying in the original language, without needing to turn it into a palatable version for anyone else. You deserve this. You deserve a place where you don't have to be a bridge, where you can just be ashore, just rest. If this video touched you deeply, leave a like and a comment telling me what you felt while watching. I read every single one. And the next video that's appearing on the screen delves deeper into this idea of how to rebuild your own identity after many years of adapting. I think it will resonate deeply with you. See you there.